Hello everyone, this is Erik, the Asian movie enthusiast, and this is my review of The Treacherous, a South Korean drama from 2015. So after being engulfed with insanity and revenge, a prince demands that beautiful women, regardless of age, marriage status, or social class, be rounded up for his personal pleasure. This causes widespread anger in the kingdom. Now, one of these would-be slaves makes quite an impression within the palace, but the prince's longtime friend also has eyes for this woman. So that's the basic premise here. Now, one thing you need to understand about The Treacherous is that this film has some serious balls to it, and it will likely offend many viewers with its immoral male characters as well as its depiction of women, who inexplicably become very willing to be sex slaves once they enter the palace. Now, one of these female characters does have a very specific reason for acting this way, but what about everyone else? Basically becomes a competition between these ladies to see who can win the honor, I guess, of being the next girl for the prince to bed. So there's definitely a little bit of a disconnect, I think, in terms of script writing, unless I missed something. Because the general premise, at the beginning of the film, you see some of these women getting rounded up, and no one's happy that this is happening. But apparently they whittle it down to about 100 women or so who are actually in the palace, and then they have this competition of sorts, or training of sorts, and they become very willing to be the prince's, carnal pleasure, so to speak. So with that said, however, okay, this is way more interesting than one might think. It certainly was more interesting than I was expecting after the first 10 or 15 minutes. So the aforementioned competition that I mentioned between the women is actually quite riveting. Although it's primarily a drama here, it does have some highly entertaining doses of comedy too. So for example, there's a lengthy hilarious training sequence near the middle section of the film, where the women are formally educated in the art of sexual pleasure. Now, I did not expect this humorous slant to the film, but I actually think it works quite well. Also, the prince himself is a psychotic nutcase, which provides some entertainment value in and of itself. I mean, just watching this guy, who has completely just lost his mind, is actually quite fascinating. Now, despite the plethora of sexual references, there are really only a small handful of sex scenes that are actually shown on screen. One of which, however, is a fairly graphic girl-on-girl intercourse sequence. The viewer should also be aware that there are some disturbing moments of graphic violence mixed in, which creates some wildly captivating tonal shifts. I know some people have a real problem with films that shift tone to excessive degrees. You hear that as a criticism for certain types of films. A lot of times the critic will say something like, well, this film just doesn't know what it wants to be. Does it want to be a comedy, or does it want to be a drama, or a sex film, or what? But, that's an understandable gripe in a lot of cases, but not every film that uses comedy and dark violence is a winner. I understand this. But I do think that The Treacherous executes these tonal shifts in such a way as to make the entire ordeal somewhat captivating. It's really kind of hard to explain why that's the case here, but it's just the way I felt while I was watching the film. I find that the South Korean film industry, in general, does a very good job at creating genre-bending and tone-shifting films. It's just one of the positive attributes of that particular film industry. Another big positive here is that this film is beautifully shot and has great visual style to it, with some outstanding production values and set designs. Very pleasing on the eyes. The acting in this is also very solid by everyone involved, and the story and characters have an engaging dynamic. Some online reviewers complain that the resolution of this film is somewhat commonplace and generic, but I did find it satisfying and actually quite interesting. Now, another interesting point about The Treacherous, I have read a handful of internet reviews that have called this film the Korean Caligula, which of course references that notorious film from 1979. If you don't know about Caligula, just do a Google search and you'll get a good idea of what that film is about. Now, there is some basis for comparison here between the Treacherous and Caligula. I mean, you have a ruler in complete control of a kingdom who is basically an insane sadist. You have rampant nudity. You have a focus on elegant set designs, and you also have some abrupt shifts towards graphic violence. But I would say that, for me, when I watched Caligula, and I actually watched it quite recently because of the references from this film, or at least the references that some reviewers made between these films. Caligula to me just came off as kind of a stomach-churning exercise that really had no genuine dramatic impact. The Treacherous, on the other hand, it was a little bit easier for me to connect with on an emotional level, even if the main character was totally reprehensible. The humor is one reason for this, because the Treacherous definitely has more humor than Caligula did. But also the violence is a bit more disturbing on a dramatic level. It just feels like you're actually watching humans commit crimes in this film, whereas Caligula was almost like just a special effects reel where poorly drawn caricatures, were just inflicting violence upon each other. So, the comparisons between these two films is somewhat justified, but I do think that The Treacherous is overall a better film than Caligula. So, in case you see those references, I just gave you my opinion on those. So, in summary, really, The Treacherous is a particularly abrasive film from South Korea, but I really could not stop watching. I quite enjoyed this one, I would say, but I do gather the impression that it will not be for most people. So keep that in mind if you decide to check it out. If you like some controversial stuff, you might want to seek it out, though. So The Treacherous is available on Region 3 DVD with English subtitles. And as always, we'll see you next time.